Hello, NG Houston. So tonight we have another overseas guest, and it's in the middle of the night for him, so this should be fun. We have Petyo from agGrid, and we're pretty excited to have them on tonight for a demo. First, I'm going to introduce my panel. Let's start with Jack. Jack, you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. My name's Jack Balbus. I work at a company called Oasis Digital, a little bit more famous as the purveyors of Angular Bootcamp, of which I am also an instructor. So good evening, everybody.
I love having you guys on the show. You guys always have good questions. And welcome, Jack. Okay, and then we have also from Angular Bootcamp, Lance. You want to say hi, Lance?
Yes, as you just said, I also teach for Angular Bootcamp. I work right down the hall from Jack in St. Louis with Oasis Digital. I've been writing Angular applications for about 4 years now, and I've never used agGrid, but I've used some other grid technologies, and I'm curious to hear about this one.
Well, this will be cool then. So this will be a new demo for you guys. You might love it. Okay, and Naresh, you want to say hello? Naresh this is a first-time panelist for Naresh, so that's awesome.
Yes, this is my first time. Or are you able to hear me now?
I think your audio is breaking up a little bit. Well, but that's okay.
Okay.
I'm glad you're here with us. And if your audio's not working too well, or you have questions, just put them in the chat, and then we'll make sure.
Sure.
But I'm glad you're here. And Josh, you want to say hello, Josh?
Hi, everyone. I'm an Angular developer here in Houston. I like to think that I help Bonnie keep NG Houston together, and yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Definitely. And did you say you were looking for an Angular developer?
I am. So if you live in Houston, thanks for the plug, Bonnie. We're looking for a full-time new Angular developer. So if you like Angular and you want to do that full-time, we got a pretty cool company, so check it out.
How would they go about getting in touch with you if they wanted to do that?
So the company is Medology. So look up medology.com. There's a careers page, and you'll see all the information there. MEDELOGY.
And I know these guys, and they're super fun. So if you want a super fun job in Houston, go look up Josh.
And we'll be at NGConf, so find me there. I'll have some weird colored hair by then.
Yeah. And stickers. Oh, I forgot. I almost forgot about the stickers, you guys. I am so excited. We're going to be passing out NG Houston stickers at NGConf, and I'm a dork. I don't know why I'm so excited about these stickers, but anyway, I digress. So more importantly, we have Petyo tonight from agGrid from Bulgaria. So Petyo, I saved the star of the show for last. So why don't you introduce yourself, and then you can show us some cool stuff.
Right. So good evening, Houston. It's the wee hours of the morning on my side, so excuse me. I'm neither on beer or coffee. My name is Petyo. I'm one of the lead developers in agGrid, which is like a fun thing to say because the company is just 10 people, so we're all lead developers here. I've been working with agGrid for maybe about a year. I have a background in building UI components for Angular. I come from one of the biggest companies in the space called Telerik. We've been dealing with Angular for a while. Me personally, I come from the Angular JS 1 days, and I'll show you a little bit more about agGrid, its connection to Angular, and how can it make your life a little bit easier. So yes, shall we start?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, I'll show you the our main agGrid demo, so you can look at it while I'm explaining a little bit more about the component. Assuming that nobody knows nothing about the grid so far, it's going to be a fun ride. By the way, we just had a release yesterday, so it's the right moment for me to show you features and discover that they don't work as expected. Well, maybe this won't happen, by the way. So I'll start a little bit giving you information, assuming that you have not used a reusable UI component so far. So agGrid is an UI component, a reusable one, which you can download as an npm package and install into your project. The purpose of it is to display tabular data to the user. Most commonly, we get data which comes from the database. and the user can do some stuff to this data. The primary target of the component is the so-called enterprise. So the feature set is extremely extensive and targeting the enterprise use cases. Of course, it's suitable for simpler cases as well. Some background. So the grid was born out of a necessity. The founder of the company, called Niall Crosby, a very handsome Irish guy who was working in the banks of London, was trying to find an UI component which to satisfy the needs of the projects he was building, and neither was around. So he decided to build one himself. And as far as I remember, he presented the first version on Angular Connect 2015. Back then, we were really excited. We were working on our own version of Angular components. So that component looked quite complex, and it had very interesting feature set. He released it as an open source project in GitHub. And it quickly got a lot of interest from the community because, in fact, it was one of the first components to fully support Angular 2 back then. The project soon started taking a lot of his time to maintain, so he started looking for people to help him. And he was maintaining it, he was implementing feature requests from the users, so on. And at some point, he decided that he'll spend his full time working on it. And in fact, he also decided, in order to do that, to release a commercial version of the component that I think happened in March 2016. So the grid has two versions. The free one is called agGrid, and there is a commercial version which is called agGrid Enterprise, has some additional feature set. And the product has been growing rapidly ever since. In fact, we are quite popular in GitHub. We have a bunch of npm downloads, which is how we measure our success. What's the current state of the company? It's a company which has around 10, maybe 12 people, full-time employees working only on this component. We have plenty of of job to do. More than 1,000 customers of the commercial versions in, as far as I see, 52 countries. Maybe this number grows a little bit. So yes, just like I said, agGrid is the only thing we do. But even after more than 2 years on the market, there is so much more to do. Our roadmap is full of feature requests and things which people demand more from the grid, and so on and so on. Now, enough talking. I would like to show you some of the features. What you're looking at is one of our main demos on the website, but maybe I should leave a little bit space for questions before I start showing the features.
I'm sure we'll have questions, but we want to see, and we're developers, so we like to see code. But yeah, show us features, and then we'll have questions as you go along.
Right. So this is the main demo. It presents a fairly complex setup of the grid. The interesting thing here is that it has 22 columns and 100 rows, which is not that much. But to make things a little bit more interesting, I'm going to switch to 100,000 rows with 22 columns. Let's generate. Yes, so that's the amount of data that our customers usually are dealing with. So that's the kind of talks we usually get. So I have 100,000 rows, maybe 200,000 rows. Can your grid handle that? And it handles them just fine. I assume that there is some lag over the video conferencing, but as you can see, the data is in here. The scrolling is quite smooth. So the performance,
it's really nice.
Yeah.
And so this is not, so this is an Angular group, right? And this is not actually written with Angular, but it works very well with Angular.
Right. So the grid itself is not written in Angular. The core rendering of the grid is not in Angular. It has an Angular component sitting on top of it. So the entire configuration, the setup of the grid is performed the way one would expect to do with Angular component. So you just pass input properties, you get event as an output, bindings, so on and so on. So, yeah.
I've previously used Kendo's grid, and they went through an effort a bit ago of rewriting it from a jQuery only to an Angular only version. Is something like that on the horizon for agGrid, or are you happy enough with this implementation that you don't have a need for that?
So the funny thing is that I previously mentioned was that I used to work with Kendo UI. So I was the product manager of Kendo UI before joining agGrid. So the decision you you mentioned was actually my decision, because the problem there we had was the jQuery legacy bit with Kendo UI. So for some reason, the Angular community was very against having jQuery dependency present in their components. It made them feel dirty. That's what the feedback that we received back in Kendo UI. With agGrid, this is not the case. There is no jQuery going on in there. The other thing which is interesting is that agGrid itself is written in TypeScript, which gives you strong typings, something that the Angular community seems to like a lot. And it totally makes sense, I guess, especially for complex components. The other interesting thing so far is that it looks like we are able to squeeze in quite better performance by manually dealing with the DOM compared to going through the Angular component abstraction. So my experience so far suggests that if you build an Angular component from the ground up, chances are that you are going to end up having worse performance, although the implementation will be a little bit more pure. Of course, the grid not being written in Angular has some minor setbacks, but so far it looks like we're dealing just fine. And to be honest, I'm willing to accept the minor setbacks we have if we're going to provide the final better end user experience.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me show you some features. So the first feature I showed you is how the grid deals with the 100,000 rows and 22 columns. By default, the grid has virtualization turned on. It's actually, I'm not sure that you can turn it off, to be honest. So only the rows and the columns which are visible in the viewport we're seeing here are present in the DOM. The rest is just kept as JavaScript objects in the data source or in your, say, data store of some sort, maybe NGRX or something. So this means that even with 100,000 rows or 1 million rows, as long as the browser can deal with the amount of data being passed, I'll get to it to how to deal with that amount of data shortly. You're good to go. The next feature which I'm going to show you is how the grid deals with sorting. That's one of the easy bits. It's a feature which the people come to expect when they're dealing with such UI components. So sorting is actually quite fast and quite performant. You can sort by ascending, descending. Also, you can implement custom sorting. Also, there is an UI menu on the side which allows you to perform some things with the column. You can pin it to the left. So let's pin the language column to the left, like this. These are the built-in features that somehow resemble a spreadsheet component like Excel, People come to expect this, also auto-sizing of the columns. Another interesting thing is that you can implement custom sorting icons over here in the column. Let's unpin this column so I can show you something else. So how the pin columns work like this. So the language column is back where it was. So the next thing which the users obviously are looking for when they're dealing with, say, 100,000 rows is filtering. And filtering is one of the most complex and interesting features for me personally in the grid. It supports several filtering modes. The most obvious one, which people tend to use a lot, is the quick filter. So there is a filter over here. People can say type Emily and Amelia, and it quickly returns only the results which are present, which this column matches. The filters can also say they can work together, so you can pick only results which match the name Emily and which have the language English. By the way, we're dealing with a data set displaying the Olympic winners for I think several decades. That's the kind of data which we're dealing with right now. Right, so Amelia Beckham has French, Norwegian, Spanish. This is some dummy data, I think, over here. So the filtering, in addition to just typing things in a text box, you can also pick things from a set filter. This is how it looks. So it has a bunch of checkboxes. This UI is very familiar to Excel users. I think it's the same over there. You can have a select all, select none. You can just pick English or French and clear filter. So that's the filter row. In addition to that, the filter is accessible through the column menu we have over here. It's basically the same kind of UI. So you can filter by string, you can filter by numbers. There is also a custom filter. This is an example of a custom filter implementation. So you can say, I just want to see the negative numbers over here, or maybe the positive ones, or even above 50,000 bank balance. Interesting. Why do we have bank balance with the Olympic winners? There is also equals, not equal, less than, numeric kind of filters going on in here. With January, it's the same. Another interesting feature when it comes to columns, in addition to the filters, is that you can have column groups. They can be expanded and collapsed, just like this. As you have noticed when I'm showing you the data around, is that the cells of the grid may contain custom things like you can put images, you can put font icons, you can put stars, you can put whatever you want. To do that, you can use templates. So just input some custom HTML in there, or you can go as far as inserting Angular components in there, completely interactive, which are bound to the data specific to this row in the grid. And you can add buttons, you cannot even grids inside the grids, and so forth. Any questions before I move to the next feature?
No, I think we're good. We're just muted. We're watching, but this is cool.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
I'm going to regenerate the data set before I show you the next thing.
I like how responsive it is. It's pretty fast. It's actually
Yes.
very fast for as much data as you have. The first time I ever made an Angular JS app, I made it and it was kind of like this layout, but it was much simpler. And I had like 20 rows of dummy data and it was really cool and it was very fast. But then when I went to production and I actually had like 500 rows of data, it crawled, you guys. I did not know about watchers back then and it was terrible because everything was on the scope and it was super slow. So it's cool that you have so many rows and it's so fast to respond to your filters.
Right, and I still remember one of the cases where we had to use Google Chrome only on Windows because for some reason Google Chrome on Mac is a little bit slower. So the application we built with AngularJS had the requirement just use Chrome on Windows.
You probably did the same thing wrong that I did.
Yeah, or maybe we just didn't use virtualization at all. The next cool thing which I wanted to show you, this is usually people just say, ah, that's really nice when I show it, is the grouping UI. So you can group columns and you can group them the way one would expect. So I just grouped, and as you can see, it happened instantly by country. And the data is now transformed into this mode where you have things grouped by the country. So as you can see, you have Argentina to the top. We can actually sort this as well. So that it sorts the inner data over here. And the records are now grouped by the country. But that's the easy bit. Now let's add another group over here. We can group by country, and then we can group by language. So Argentina now is grouped by Spanish. The interesting thing is that we can move the language part to the front. And as you can see, even with 100,000 rows, I'll keep getting back to that, but it's really cool that the user can perform this operation and it happens without a lot of waiting. It's really fast. So if we expand French, you can see the language, the countries which speak French. So we have Belgium over here. We have, oh, that's quite a lot of people in there. Let's go back and collapse Belgium. You get the deal. Another thing which is interesting here is that we also have selection. So you can select the group and it selects all the children in it. We have Jessica, we have Ava, so forth and so forth. So the grid offers two means of dealing with groups. The first one, which I showed, is that people can grab a column from the column headers and just drag it to the top, just like this. And another cool thing, which is a recent addition, so I'll show it to you because I believe that there are people in the audience who have seen the grid and maybe they have even used it, is that we have this tool panel on the side, which allows you to perform some complex operations. So people can expand and collapse it if they need a little bit more space. So you can grab a column on the side. You can drag it down here. You can also grab the language and you can drag it down here. So it works in the same way. The tool panel is actually really nice, especially if you end up with a bunch of columns because you can filter them. And I hope that this works. Yes, it works. Nice. So if you have a complex column, this UI is really a godsend because you can collapse column groups. You can find the column group which you actually need. The user can hide columns like that, and you can even hide whole column groups until you find only the data you need. That's really nice if you have to deal with a complex UI. Again, I hope that you guys don't have to build complex UI like this, but in the enterprise, this is how people end up with with complex data. Let me turn on the participant again. Okay. So obviously you can group and you can reorder the grouping columns. I showed you this already. The next cool thing which I wanted to show you is just let me get rid of the grouping and I'll show you the entire set of columns. Is another thing which people usually have to implement on themselves by themselves, and with the grid this is no longer the case. It's editing, so the records we see over here are editable by the user just by double clicking them. You turn the column into an input field so people can change the names. Let me put myself in here as an Olympic winner. So the editing is actually a very, very complex part of the grid, because in addition to the input field I showed you over here, you can also add editors like drop-down menus. You can even have a custom drop-down, the one which is present over here, where you have records which can display flags, so on and so on. This is also using virtualization. So if you have plenty of records over here, which is usually the case, it also won't affect your performance. You can safely, let's say, 1,000 of choices in here. The cool thing here is that you can implement your own custom editors with Angular. So they are just Angular components which just follow a set of interfaces that have to be implemented. And the grid will just take this component and add it as an editor over here. We also have true false. That's a very interesting UI we have over here. So let's input 6 stars. Well, this almost worked. It's limited to say 3, so it changes. Another cool thing which is a little bit hard to show right now, but there is a keyboard navigation present, so people can navigate with their arrows, with tab and enter, especially if you're dealing with financial institutions where the users come from Excel. They are usually looking for this because this increases their productivity. The keyboard navigation is fully customizable, so you can implement custom shortcuts, or you can change the behavior. When a certain key is pressed, you can say, I want to implement this just like Excel, or I want to implement it as a previous Windows grid, or any kind of grid that people are used to. So pressing enter, or just pressing some, say, any alpha key, enters edit mode. Yes, we have none over here. Right. Any questions about the editing?
I think that this is a lot of detail to go into, and I think it's cool because there's so much functionality here, but also we're developers, so we want to see like how this is going to work and how we're going to use this.
Right. It's a fair question.
Like what I'm wondering, you mentioned that we can inject our own components for the editors. I'm curious, for the renderers, is that just through an ng template or something like that, or is it all contained in a different way?
Right. That's a fair question actually. Features cell editing. So I will show you the documentation. It's also quite nice for people to see how this works. So the documentation, first of all, is framework agnostic, but especially things like how to implement a certain editor components are covered in more details about each framework, because it's obviously necessary for the Angular users to see some code in their framework of choice. Cell editors. So cell editor is the one which we are looking for. And that's the section. It's called Angular Cell Editing. It's possible to provide Angular Cell editors for agGrid to use if you're using. So the thing which have to be done here is that you should implement the iCell editor interface. It's mostly an Angular component. I will show you a sample code to see how it feels. So that's the kind of example which is accessible in our documentation. It's fairly easy to find actually, and I'm going to show you how and walk you through the implementation. So that's an app component you have over here. That's the definition of agGrid Angular, and it has the framework components bound over here. The field framework components, we should find it somewhere here. So we have a mood renderer and the mood editor. And that's how you pass components to the grid. The mood editor component is something which we imported from the mood editor. And the mood editor component itself, it's over here. By the way, I will open this in Plunker so we can have some more real estate over here. That's another cool feature which I like, is that you can load any of our examples over here and just play with it a little bit more. So the mood editor component, it's just an Angular component that has template, the styles, the usual bit. And here you get data passed just like this with the agInit method. So you obtain the value of the cell which is about to be edited, and then you have to implement this bit agInit. You have to implement get value so that the grid knows the result of the edit operation afterwards. There are several more details because you can have a pop-up editing, which is just something that lives outside of the grid UI. Imagine that you want to implement a text area or something like this, more bigger visual component. And yes, that's the actual implementation. It's quite simple. On click, then you set happy, then stop editing. So that's the deal actually. You pass a component. It's not working through a template. Does this help you a little bit? Does this answer your question?
I think that was Lance's question.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. As I said before, I come from Kendo, and Kendo, it was all done with templates in a different way. I think this feels more natural for me as
I
an
agree
Angular
with you.
developer. I mean, it's not what I'm personally used to, but I think it would have been an easier transition.
I think so. It looks a little bit more complicated, to be honest. This is like the native Angular implementation we have. The
Yeah, I find,
interesting thing is that you can also implement editor components in plain JavaScript or rendering components in plain JavaScript, even though you're in an Angular environment. You can also use expressions, which is kind of the equivalent of Kendo UI templates. So this works as well. You can also implement editors as functions. And using Angular components is like the most full-blown alternative for doing this. There are multiple ways.
yeah, it's really interesting that you're actually passing like a full Angular component. Like, I don't think I've ever seen that in any other context. I'm kind of interested to like know what it's doing on the other side to make that work.
You mean on the internal implementation?
Right.
Yes. There is one caveat over here, and I just wanted to show you because people usually trip over this, is that in your Angular app module, you have to register the agGrid module, and you have to pass the components that the grid should know about, just like this. That's the syntax, which looks a little bit strange, but for me, once you get used to it, it's actually quite convenient.
Yeah, because I was like, because Angular needs to know about those things in order to like, because it has its module system that you need to put stuff in. So that's really interesting that you basically say you can add your components to my module.
Exactly.
Is this architectural approach the same for the free version as the enterprise version?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
The enterprise version is the free version is fully featured. There is nothing that we withhold compared to the enterprise version. There are certain features which are present in the enterprise version, but they're not like critical to the behavior of the component, like the one we're seeing over here. It works for both versions. To give you an example of what the enterprise version, what is limited to the enterprise version, that would be pivoting, for example, which is like a very, very enterprise feature. I assume people need only if they deal with a very, very complex data. But let's first answer any more questions if you have any of those.
So I have a more personal question. You
Sure.
said you came from Kendo and you've worked on that project, and now you're working on this. It's it's a glorified table. It's got all these power features. So as a developer, I'm not sure how much you're coding day to day or you're managing. I'm not sure where your position is in all this, but what has been kind of an interesting challenge that you've come across in the last year with Angular 2, becoming Angular 4, and now it's Angular 5, and just that whole thing coming out and being big, and the whole React world and component base. So have you, as a developer, faced some interesting challenges that maybe we could relate to or we could learn from?
Yes. Well, I believe that every UI library developer right now is struggling with the same thing. I still maintain my contacts with the colleagues in the previous company, so we are in the same GitHub issues, discussing the same problems over and over again. Personally, what happened with Angular 2 and before with Angular 1 and Angular 2 going on, and React coming to the stage, also Vue to make things a little bit more complex as well. Not to mention that we also Aurelia was also there as an alternative, and so on and so on. It's actually really the landscape changed a lot. So it looks like we can no longer talk about JavaScript developers and web developers. There are camps and tribes and people who pick certain religion and they tend to stick with it, and they tend to not like what's going on with people who have different choices for them. For me personally, this means that I have trouble following everything which happens in the JavaScript world right now. Thankfully, I have some background in Angular, obviously, so I can show you stuff around. But last month we went to a Vue conference in Europe, so we had to show things around to people who have made their choices with the Vue framework. And I'll tell you something: I don't know anything about Vue before going to this conference, so I just had to improvise. Thankfully, Vue feels a little bit similar to, say, React or Angular.
So that's a really interesting challenge. And you said there's about 10 people on the team. So,
right.
And are all of them writing JavaScript?
Yes, we have.
So my main question is, you made a really interesting comment, which I partially disagree with, that people have to pick a tribe and you have to be an Angular developer, you have to be a React developer. There's plenty of people out there that learn all of them and use them all for different reasons. I'm curious if your team is built up of, do you have one guy that's the Angular guy and he's really good at it and he implements the Angular portion, and one React guy? Or are you cross-pollinating skills on your team? Because I personally am at a company that decided to invest in Angular, and so that was a business decision. And so I'm in the Angular framework 100% at work because that's the business decision. But you guys don't get that luxury because you're hoping that people in React and Vue and maybe even raw JavaScript like Vino Vanilla and all of these places. So how have you built a team that has been able to kind of share the right amount of knowledge, right? Because you do want to work with Node, but you're not a Node, or Vue, so you're not a Vue developer. So I'm really curious what your team looks like, or how you've decided to grow a team needing all of those different skills in one building.
That's a very nice question, and it will also give me the opportunity to show you the guys around. So we have Niall over here. That's the technical team, and that's me again. So by the way, I mentioned that we are 10 people. 6 of them are technical. We have some sales and marketing going on in here. So I'll explain to you the dev team. That's the interesting question. So we have Niall and Alberto, the 2 developers, and also Rob. These are guys that come from, say, 15 years of writing Java and large financial applications in the banks of London. So these guys are dealing with the core of the grid, which is written in TypeScript with 0 framework dependencies. So they are actually implementing the features in TypeScript, not in a specific framework. Then we have this amazing guy called Sean Landsman, and he's our framework guy. That's his title. He's the lead developer of frameworks, and he's the wonder guy who's maintaining the Angular, the React, the Vue, the Aurelia wrappers. So he's the one who balances all the new and upcoming features of Angular, of React, of Vue in his head. So he has the most comprehensive outlook on every framework.
I feel like I met Sean at ngConf.
Right. By the way, let me plug something. We are going to be at ngConf this year. So if you guys are around,
I'm totally going to be at ngConf.
yes, that's
I
cool.
think
I'll be there.
Huh?
Yeah, I'll be there too.
Mhm.
Yay.
We'll have so much fun.
I'm
Don't
going
get
to
me
be missing
started.
it for the first time this year. For the first time this year.
You've never been, Jack?
No, I've been. This is the first time that I'm missing.
Oh, that's brutal. I would hate that.
Are you doing a session or a workshop on agGrid?
We're just going to sponsor it, and we have a booth. That's how we usually go there. So we talk to customers, we talk to prospects, we discuss things. I don't think that we're going to have a talk this year, but maybe a lightning talk. I don't know. Should check the schedule.
Who's going to be there? Sean? And
We are discussing this. I'm going to be there for sure. The rest of the guys have been there last year. That's how we met actually. So I don't know if they want to visit the US again. By the way, just to finish the presentation of the team, me and Rob, we are interested in React. Obviously, we know a little bit about Angular, enough to give you guys some presentation. And the funny thing is that in this team of seasoned software engineers, I took the role of being the front-end developer. So I'm dealing with the themes mostly, and I spent most of my days writing CSS. So it's kind of a relief, to be honest, because CSS works in all platforms. But enough about me and enough about the team. Yeah, it's a challenge to recap the framework question. It's a great challenge because everything moves so fast. The nice thing about it is that I see a lot of cross-pollination of ideas. React picking things from Angular and Angular picking things from React and Vue getting everything from everybody. And it feels like a friendly competition so far. I must agree with you that people don't tend to hate the other choices.
we did. We had a couple, what was it in December, Josh? We had a big Angular versus React.
Yeah, we had a good time. That was fun.
Yeah. We really liked the React people. They were pretty cool.
Yeah, yes, they are actually. We're going to both React and Angular conferences. So people are just people.
Right.
There is no religion, nothing.
I have a small question. What do you, if you're able to track it, what is the framework that's implementing this component the most? Like, do you have a winner, like a certain framework that's very popular with your specific product?
That's an interesting question. What we're seeing based on the numbers at NPM is that they are actually equal.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
as you can see. And maybe we can get. That's a nice question. So I'll just show you some real data, maybe.
Sure. Drum roll, right?
That's why we keep Josh around.
Who's the winner? Hopefully it's Angular, right? Because we're at Angular Houston right now.
Okay, so you can see that it's a very, very close tie.
Yeah.
Over here we have, so agGrid is the base component.
Yeah.
And it gets a lot of downloads. agGrid React is over here. agGrid Angular is over here. So we have 14,000 downloads of agGrid React and 11,000 downloads of agGrid Angular.
Mm-hmm.
But as you can see, over here we have like
Right.
Angular.
So they trade places every now and then.
Yes.
Yeah, that's surprising how evenly they're being used right now.
It's funny because they can't on YouTube, they can't see our faces because I have it focused on your screen. But it was funny because as soon as you started showing that, I saw every panelist's forehead because everybody leaned forward at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry YouTube people missed that because that was funny.
Yes.
Cool.
Again, we don't discriminate. We love everybody.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You know what? The interesting. I'll just expand a little bit more on this question because it's really interesting. As you can see, we have 31,000 downloads of agGrid. We have 12,000 React and 10,000 Angular. This means that there are roughly 9,000 people who use the grid without any framework, I think. So my guess would be that these people are either still working on old projects or maybe they are on AngularJS 1 because AngularJS 1, which we still support, is bundled inside agGrid. That's a very interesting statistic for me, and I really want to reach out to these people and ask them, how do you use agGrid? You don't use any framework. You're obviously building a huge enterprise project. How do you do it without framework?
Hopefully it's not jQuery development still.
Yeah, well,
That'd
I don't
be a
know.
rough life.
Well,
Well,
jQuery had it
Well,
from.
if we have anyone watching who's using agGrid without Angular or React, Petyo wants to talk to you.
There you go. Yeah. Pitch those people.
No.
So I did have one more question about this. What would you say is approximately the proportion of shared code between the Angular and React and the other versions? Like how much of that, like is it 80% is the code that's shared and then like there's just 20% of framework specific code, or is it higher or lower than that?
The entire actual implementation of the grid itself is shared between the Angular and React.
Yep.
What Angular and React, the wrappers for Angular and for React do is that they adapt the interface of the grid to the specific framework. So they are just framework bindings, if I may call them like this. They just make sure that you can pass properties around, that you can bind input and output.
So it's an incredibly thin layer, is what you're saying.
Yes,
that just glues it in.
I think that the React wrapper is maybe a couple of 100 lines of code, excluding some auto-generated properties, something like this. So yeah, it's a very thin layer. But the interesting bit is that the agnostic bit is designed as a component itself, so it works quite well with wrappers like these.
That's very interesting. That's something that we've kind of theorized about here at Oasis Digital, but we haven't ever had the occasion to implement a large body of code kind of framework agnostically and then use in multiple different frameworks. So it's really, really cool and interesting to hear that somebody has done that with a very large portion of code.
Mm-hmm. By the way, did I mention that the whole project is available in GitHub, including the enterprise version? So if you guys need any inspiration, you can always check how the wrappers work. So Sean has done some incredible work figuring out the internals of the frameworks so that people can feel just fine in their home. So agGrid is over here. That's the most popular repository. So if you have the time, just go there, visit it, and give us a star. Thank you very much. Same goes for the enterprise version. So here, it's all open source. You can browse the source. You can figure out how certain bits are implemented, and so are the wrappers. Here is the Angular wrapper itself, and we have just released something. Yes, 14 hours ago. That's the version 17. Okay. If you guys don't have any more questions, I am going to show you the bit of the grid which I feel most uncomfortable demoing it because it's really, really complex.
Okay, buckle your seatbelts, guys.
Right. So I just press this checkbox and then we should hope that this works as expected. I think that pivoting worked quite well with this. So that's pivoting. Pivoting is a really, really interesting feature. And Niall is really good at demoing it because he implemented this and he has my uttermost respect for figuring out how pivoting works and how to make sense out of it. The way he explains to me is that now you turn the rows into columns, and somehow this all makes sense to financial users. So I'll try to show you how it works. So that's monthly breakdowns, that's total meanings. Once you enter pivot mode, the grid just turns the data around. So you can drill in it just like this. Name, language, city. So I just changed the grid into something which completely doesn't make any sense. Let's turn this back in. So values. So you can basically you can get the sums of say total winnings for January and February and so on visible in this column. So that's aggregation of data. That's really interesting. I'll show you the documentation for it because it's one of those unique features. If you go to say Kendo UI, what's going on in there is that you have a separate component called pivot grid. It's just meant to deal with pivoting. With agGrid, what's going on is that you have pivoting built in inside the grid, and it works extremely well with the rest of the features. So it's bundled inside the main components. So that's the simple pivoting mode we have over here. Let me show you this demo. So we have pivoting United States. We have some of gold medals over here, some of silver medals over here, and the same goes for the rest of the countries. If I expand the tool panel, you can see that this is an example of pre-configured grid. So the developer configures the grid for the end user, and the end user can just browse pivoted data like this. Of course, the end user can also remove some values over here. The cool thing is, and I don't like the way we have built the UI because it's not immediately obvious for people, but once you know it, it's actually really nice that you can change the aggregation function from the menu on the side. So you can say max silver, not like that it makes sense, but still. You can get the average as well. That's interesting. And the same applies for the rest of the columns. So that's just one of those mind-blowing things to me personally. One day I'll figure it out in more details. So any of you guys know a little bit more about pivoting? Any questions?
I once went to a SQL Server conference, not because I had any interest, but because someone at my company bought a ticket and couldn't go, and they said the new guy should go. So I saw some sessions on pivot tables, and this brings those back, but I didn't actually understand them then or now. But I can see that this is could be a very useful feature for your enterprise customers, and I can see why it's a differentiator between the enterprise license and the free license.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very niche feature, but the people who need it badly. That's what I learned. Yeah.
So it looks like my main question is, since this is UI focused, and in general, it's a very polished product. I'm very impressed with like the pixel perfection and how everything is aligned very, very well and very professional. What has been your experience, because this is an enterprise focused tool, in the user experience, you know, the UX design, research, and being an open source project? Are you guys doing research to make better design decisions, or are you all mostly focused on the code? Where does that fit in this, you know, room of 6 developers? And you're writing CSS, but you didn't mention you're designing anything. So do you have someone that is doing that?
Right. So that's a very interesting question, to be honest, and quite complex. So, like I mentioned, the combination of our team is yielding the results you're seeing over here. Since I come from a web developer background, I used to design a lot of products which are meant for the end users, where you work with graphic designers and you have to have this attention to the detail when it comes to pixel perfection and whatnot, and also the convenience of the UI itself, not just picking pretty colors and so on and so on. So that's what I contribute personally. The rest of the guys contribute their personal experience and years of working in the banks with where they built internal applications. Because when you build internal applications, the advantage of doing that is that you have your users usually next door, because you build this for, say, the accounting department or the business analyst department. In this particular question, we're also doing a lot of testing on ourselves, and we accept feedback from people, because we have a very active GitHub community, and we also get plenty of feedback through our dedicated support channel, where people say, yeah, this doesn't feel quite right. So it's a very iterative process of adjusting things, improving them, and so on and so on. And we also take inspiration from existing UI solutions, Excel being the most prevalent one, since we're dealing with the enterprise. So the enterprise has been migrating people out of Excel-based UIs for the last 20 years, I guess, or maybe even more. So if you want to figure out how something is done, and people are feeling accustomed to it, you just open Excel and you look at it. But we are also trying to improve there, because just copying Excel features is not going to get us very far. Another thing which I can add, it also matches my next point in the presentation, is that the grid has several themes. It has this nice light theme which we called Balham, because it's Balham is the neighborhood in London where our office resides. We also have a dark version of it, which looks quite, on the opposite if you're building an application with a dark UI. Another thing which is going to resonate with the Angular people is the material version of the theme. So this works really nice when it's combined with Angular material. That was our goal when designing it, because we really like what Angular material does and the material language itself. So we have implemented the material language specifications over here. We have the large pink checkboxes. We also have the filtering UI, which is implemented. The menu over here implements the tabs at the top. We also tried to keep the white space consistent with their guidelines. The guidelines are fairly complex, to be honest. And when you apply them on top of such kind of a complex UI, it feels quite large. Personally, that's how I feel about it. But the nice thing about having such a large UI is that it's touch friendly. So the checkboxes are over here as well. Again, there are some limitations, also performance related ones. We don't have a ripple effect, which is like the signature effect for material, but the rest of the things just blend in quite nicely. We also have some older themes over here. That one feels a little bit older to me, but maybe you have an application that needs a UI like this. And another interesting thing is I'm going to show you is that if you don't like any of the themes, you can just start with a blank theme. It doesn't look that great, to be honest, here. And you can build a theme on your own. We have documented the process of designing one if you really need something quite custom. Okay, I'll give you guys some space for questions.
No.
How long has the project been out? Or how long has it been in development?
The initial version was built in Christmas 2014, as far as I remember. So it's been 2015, 2016, 2017. This makes full 3 years, I guess, and a little bit more. Initially, it was just a one-man product. So the guy started it, Niall. And eventually the rest of the team, the team has been growing. We've had, I joined last year, Rob joined last year. So it has been, we have 6 engineers working on it right now. So the capacity has been extended recently. But yeah, it has been 3 years and a little bit more.
That's awesome.
So I have a question that is probably pretty niche, but on a previous project, I mentioned that we went with Kendo, and the reason that we chose that one is that it was the only grid at the time that we found that allowed rows to be different heights. So as we would sometimes essentially have, where you might have hare and hounds on the screen there, we would have hare and hounds on one line and then something else on another line. We'd actually have 2 bits of information in the same row. Is that something that agGrid supports now?
So agGrid, this is in the pipeline actually. We do support custom row heights, so you can change the row heights of the grid in general, but we don't allow to have, say, the third row being with a different height than the rest of the rows, if this is what you're asking for.
Yeah, that is what I'm asking. Okay. Are you saying that is in the pipeline, or that?
That's in the pipeline, yeah. That's something that we have. That's a very popular feature request, so
Okay.
we're going to look into it.
Cool.
To give you a little bit more details about the complexity of this feature, the reason why it's in the pipeline and not implemented yet is because of the UI virtualization, which we support by default. Because imagine that you want to have a row down the, say, the 1000th row, you want it to be a little bit more higher. We need to know this upfront in order for us to calculate the scroll bar, because what you're seeing on the site is just a calculation performed by the grid itself. So there is a lot of complexity in this space.
Yeah, that makes sense. We avoided that by, well, we had other reasons that we could only pull in 50 rows at a time. So we didn't have full virtualization. But if we had had that as a requirement, I don't know what we would have done as to combine those together. So
yeah, it's a very complex thing. One thing which I usually suggest, if you have to deal with such kind of scenario, I'll take the opportunity to show you a feature which I really like, because if you have to deal with a lot of data in a single row, then you might as well look into implementing a master detail kind of implementation, kind of UI, where you have each row can be expanded and you can add custom details inside the expanded so-called row detail. The first demo which we have over here, I will switch to Angular right now. It's just the same demo, it doesn't have any functional difference over here, is that you can add more details in here. You can also add, let me find another demo down the road. You can also add images, or just text, or images with text, or fully interactive thing like the one we have over here. Custom detail cell render with a form. You can also add forms in here. So that's that really shines when you have to deal with complex data. That's what I would recommend in cases like this, if you have the opportunity, of course, and the requirements are not hard coded. Okay. Any more questions about the theming?
I think we're out of questions, which is probably good for you because it's like 3 o'clock in the morning in Bulgaria.
Oh, that's fine. I'll just start my workday immediately after that. Okay, I have a few more simple features, but I really like them because they're really cool. They will take us maybe 5 minutes more. They're recent introductions, so I'm excited about them. And because I haven't seen them in other grid, to be honest, so I consider them unique. The first one would be row dragging, which is really cool. So you can change the the order of the rows. The nice thing about this is that you have the APIs exposed behind this, allow you to reorder records in your backend if you really want this. There is also selection going on in here. The other interesting thing which I'll go over is export. So once you have this kind of selection, you can export to CSV or Excel for additional, maybe you want the users to integrate this into another system. I'll also show you the rectangular selection, which works like this. So you can say, grab this rectangle of data. And the interesting thing is that you have some quick stats at the bottom of the grid. I hope you guys can see them. So you have the count, you have the minimum, the maximum, you also have the sum, you also have the average of the numbers selected. This is really, really handy because usually people export data to Excel in order for them to figure out, say, the average or the maximum or the sum of the numbers they're looking at. So this makes the grid really appropriate for financial applications. And people don't have to export to Excel that often. So range selection, column reordering. Yeah, I think that I showed the last feature. People can obviously reorder columns up to their liking, and they can resize them. And the last thing which I wanted to show you, it's also a fairly recently released feature, is the tree data. So back to the comparison of Kendo UI, which is one of the most popular component suites out there. But same would apply to say another vendors in the space like DevExpress or Widmo or so on. Usually they have a bunch of components which each one is very specific to a certain feature. With agGrid, it's exactly the opposite. We have tree data. In Kendo, that would be, say, a tree grid, or I don't remember the name actually, where you can display hierarchical data. I'll show you how it looks. It looks just like this. So you can nest a bunch of records below each other and you can collapse them just like a tree view. We also have an example over here that looks like a file browser. That's really cool. You can implement a file system viewer with agGrid like this. And I'll also show you the code because it's quite interesting. The approach we have taken over here is that you have this this set of raw data. Let me open it in Plunker. You have this set of data where one of the fields describes the path that's going to be used for the tree data visualization. So you have a folder named txt, and the file path suggests that it should be nested beneath the documents node, and that's how the grid builds a tree data out of the data you passed. So you pass flat data and you use this configuration. And of course, you can do other advanced stuff if this format doesn't really suit you, but the final result is an UI that looks like this. And you, as a bonus, obviously, you get everything that you can do in the rest of the mode. So you can have editing, you can have, I think, grouping, and you can also have virtualization on top of it as well. So that's the technical demo which I wanted to show you. If you guys have any questions.
I just have one question. We have people, well, we have people who watch online during the live broadcast, but we also have people who come back later and watch this. So if we have somebody who watches this later after we're gone, how can they, like, you guys obviously have really extensive docs. So probably any questions they have, they can go and dive into the docs. But other than that, if they have, you know, something really specific that they want to ask about, what's the best way to reach out to you guys?
Right, that's a good question. I forgot to mention it. So the first place where they should look for, and they can also start asking questions, is our GitHub repository. We have plenty of inquiries going on in there, questions about this and that. We tend to visit it as often as we can and just respond to things. There is also an active community going on, so other users reply to questions from time to time if they're not highly specific. There is also a tag in Stack Overflow called agGrid. People also post questions in there. If the people are looking into our enterprise set of features, and they decide to go with the commercial version of agGrid, they can always open a trial account. This happens by filling in this form, and the trial account is, I think it's 60 days, so you got 2 months of evaluation, but I'm not sure about this. Yes, you limit your trial to 2 months. And during that period, we have a dedicated support channel in Zendesk. I'm not sure if you guys know about Zendesk. If you don't know, it's a really cool software for providing customer support to end users and also to developers. So if you open a trial account, you can reach out to us in private. You can also post details about your project and you get a guaranteed response from us in, I think, 24 hours. So that's quite fast.
It's awesome.
Okay.
I don't have any more questions. Do you panelists have any more questions?
Well, I know Bonnie's going to say it, but I'm really impressed and thankful that you showed up at such a weird time of day. And thanks for answering all my hard questions.
Oh, thank you very much, guys. And the questions were really nice because I could cover Kendo as well, which is my former expertise.
Yeah, we like we see the Kendo team a lot at conferences too. They're pretty cool. We like them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think that's it then for tonight. I really appreciate you coming on, Petyo, and telling y'all that I said hello and everybody said hello, and we really enjoyed having you. And we will see you guys. You're going to be definitely at NGConf?
Yes, that's for sure. Look for the booth, look for the stickers, and look for the very jet-lagged European guys. You know, you have the advantage at the US events usually. But
We will find
yeah, but just let's exchange visits. The European conference, Angular Connect, is really big, and it's right in our backyard. To be honest,
I went to Angular Connect last year and I had so much fun. I loved it. That was the first time I'd ever been over there, and I went to London and I stayed there a couple days after the conference, and it was so much fun. So yeah, I would love to come back to Angular Connect every year. It was awesome.
Okay. Yes. So see you soon, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.